Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello, one and all, and welcome to this, my special 30th episode of the DVD Shelf Foreign Flix, the show that would rather high-five a good movie than stab a bad one. Today I have a very special treat for you viewers, as this episode is all about one of the most influential, remade, and well-known Japanese writers and directors ever, Akira Kurosawa. When it comes to this legendary director, there is no shortage of great films to review, so to keep from making a 10-hour episode, I'll just be reviewing the Criterion Collection Akira Kurosawa Samurai Classics DVD set, in addition to their Blu-ray counterparts. Akira Kurosawa is arguably one of the most influential directors of modern cinema, with his classic films directly influencing everything from westerns, such as The Magnificent Seven and A Fistful of Dollars, to sci-fi such as Star Wars. There have been countless movies and TV shows that have been heavily influenced by or direct remakes of just the 4 movies in this one set. Additionally, he's considered a revolutionary filmmaker in the way he told stories on film, utilizing methods that were virtually unheard of in this medium at the time. He may not have done everything first, but he is considered the first in combining various story elements and filmmaking techniques that have since become commonplace. As such, I know that some of these movies are hard to watch for the modern audience, considered slow by some in this short attention span era. But don't let that scare you off. These are some masterful works of cinema, primarily thanks to Akira Kurosawa's dedication to his craft. Born on March 23, 1910 as the youngest of 8 siblings, Akira Kurosawa was fortunate enough to be raised in an atypical family. While growing up, his father believed that Akira and his siblings should all be exposed to and knowledgeable of Western culture. Even though it was widely believed that movies were harmful for children to watch, his father believed that taking his children to movies was a great way to expose them to Western culture. This led to Akira's brother becoming a film translator, further exposing Akira to films he might not have otherwise seen. After graduating from school, instead of film, he set his sights on art, intending to become a painter. However, when his older brother committed suicide, it fell on Akira to be the head of the Kurosawa household, and as such, he needed to find a career that would pay better, causing him to ditch his thus far unsuccessful painting career in favor of filmmaking, and he immediately began applying for positions. An essay of his caught the eye of Kajiro Yamamoto, a prominent director at the time, who subsequently met with and interviewed Kurosawa, where the young aspiring filmmaker made a lasting impression. Yamamoto took Kurosawa under his wing at Toho Studios, employing him as his assistant director on over a dozen films, mentoring Kurosawa during that time. Despite Japan's entry into World War II and the economic struggles that came with it, Kurosawa was promoted to director. He submitted numerous scripts to Toho, but the stringent and often overbearing Japanese censors struck all of them down as they felt they might tarnish Japan's image. Eventually, his script was accepted, and Kurosawa wrote and directed his first film in 1943, Sanjuro Sugata, pairing the iconic director with actor Takashi Shimura for the first time. Shimura would go on to appear in 21 of Kurosawa's 31 feature films, though not always in a lead role. Following the end of the war, the rigid censors in Japan were disbanded, and Kurosawa's career really began to take off as he gained the freedom to experiment and truly express himself. He responded almost immediately by directing and co-writing the 1946 film No Regrets of Our Youth, which more or less criticized the aggressive, militarized Japanese regime that led the country to enter World War II. In 1948, Kurosawa would hire actor Toshiro Mifune for the first time in the film Drunken Angel, which also marked his first true success in Japan. Most people who have watched Kurosawa's films are quick to associate Mifune and Kurosawa, which is no surprise given that Mifune would appear in 16 of his films, typically as a lead actor. Both he and the aforementioned Takashi Shimura are in all 4 films I'll be reviewing today. 2 years later, in 1950, Kurosawa wrote and directed Rashomon, which provided some revolutionary filmmaking techniques as he became the first to film extensively on location in a forest, and the first to point the camera at the sun, an act thought to be disastrous to the film reel at the time. Rashomon became his first true multinational hit thanks to its groundbreaking storytelling structure. It was so well regarded that the Academy Awards gave it an honorary award for the best foreign language film released in the United States during 1951. It was essentially the best foreign film Oscar back before such a category existed in the Academy Awards. It was so good, they created an award for it. Even today, the storytelling structure is incredibly unique, playing with the idea of the unreliable narrator and point of view in a way that few films do. As he continued to improve his craft, Kurosawa became known as a perfectionist filmmaker who put a great amount of care and detail into each and every shot he filmed, making sure all of the elements are aligned just so, as evidenced by the extensive and intricate storyboarding he would do for each and every shot he planned to film, pulling on his aspirations of being a painter in his youth to basically create small paintings for every shot he wanted. This eye for detail and scene composition went further than most filmmakers, such as when he demanded a natural stream be made to flow in the opposite direction, as he thought it would be more pleasing to the eye. And that when making period pieces, he had the cast wear their costumes every day for weeks before filming to give the clothes a more worn and natural look. With his star rising both within and out of Japan, Kurosawa set about creating another ambitious and revolutionary film that would influence the industry and revamp not only samurai films, but the action genre as a whole. At the time that he began making films, Japanese samurai films followed true samurai during a more peaceful time in the country's history. Kurosawa decided to do things differently, setting his samurai films during the earlier feudal era, a time period that was full of strife and infighting. Additionally, most of the characters Kurosawa focuses on in these films are masterless samurai, commonly referred to as ronin. This often resulted in his samurai films being critical misses in Japan, and now they are undoubtedly his most popular and well-known, and what we think of as the epitome of a samurai film. And one such film that is also his first foray into samurai films is none other than the first movie I'll be reviewing today, 1954's Seven Samurai. The film opens up in a small farming village, where the villagers debate over what to do about their bandit problem. They're barely surviving as is and don't think they'll be able to feed themselves after the bandits come back again with the next harvest. The village elders suggest hiring samurai to aid them in defending the village, but given how poor they are, the only thing they have to offer is rice. The villagers travel to find any samurai willing to help, and after many unsuccessful attempts, they come across Kanbei, an older samurai who heroically rescues a kidnapped boy. He eventually agrees to help them, stating that they will need at least 7 samurai total, and he goes about recruiting them. The skilled archer, the old friend of Kanbei's, the master swordsman, the easygoing one, the untested samurai, and the joker. Together, these 7 concoct strategies and teach the villagers how to defend themselves in an effort to defeat the ruthless bandits once and for all. In most cases, if someone has only heard of one Kurosawa film, it's this one. Seven Samurai is considered one of the most influential Japanese films of all time, and is a hallmark of Kurosawa's career. Some actually consider this the first action film as we know them today. Granted, by today's standards, where action films are full of high-impact fights, intense shootouts, and mega explosions, this is more like a drama. But at the time, this contained much more kinetic action than other films of the era. Additionally, this is considered among the first, if not the first, to utilize now common plot and technical elements, including but not limited to the reluctant hero, our protagonist being introduced via an action unrelated to the plot, the use of slow motion for dramatic effect, and the recruiting of a group of heroes with their own strengths and weaknesses to fight a difficult opponent. These elements, amongst others from this film, have since been seen countless times in cinema and TV. Of course, there are also the more obvious influences in the form of remakes. The Magnificent Seven, released 6 years later in 1960, has become a classic western in its own right, featuring a nearly identical story, characters, and even some similar scenes. That remake then went on to spawn a number of sequels, an enjoyable enough TV show spin-off in the 90s, and then a remake of its own in 2016 with an all-star cast, but a bit of a different story from the original. One of the more interesting things about this film is the use of Toshiro Mifune. He is typically some variation of a tough guy character, a role he plays perfectly. However, here he's playing a complete goofball who can't be taken seriously. Even though he's a member of the titular Seven, his character isn't an actual samurai, just a guy with a sword. So, unlike the other samurai who are more level-headed and well-trained in the art of combat, he is brash, irritable, and expressive. Apparently, Kurosawa even went so far as to actually allow something he rarely allowed, which was for Mifune to do a certain amount of ad-libbing with the mannerisms and behavior of the character, resulting in one of the more unique and comedic characters for Toshiro Mifune, and certainly one very different from the other characters he plays in the 3 films in this set. Seven Samurai is a piece of classic cinema, and considered by some to be Kurosawa's masterpiece. In this day and age, it might be a bit more difficult of a watch. I mean, it is a 3.5-hour movie after all. But this contains some fantastic characterization, an influential mix of technical and creative elements, and a great story. I find it difficult to wholeheartedly recommend this to everyone, but if you consider yourself a film buff, enjoy classics, or are studying film, this is a must-watch. While not his first film, nor his first big film, this is perhaps the movie that truly put him on the map and is arguably his most well-known. Now, the next film on this set was released 4 years later in 1958, and while not as iconic and popular as some of his other films, it became well known for being one of the influences for an intensely popular film series. So let's take a look at Hidden Fortress. Hidden Fortress follows 2 bickering friends, Tahe and Madashichi, as they are caught in the aftermath of a battle between the Yamana and Akazuki clans. They had intended to fight for the victorious Yamana clan, but they arrived too late and were assumed to be Akazuki survivors and forced into slavery. First to bury the dead, and then to search for the 200 pieces of Akazuki gold thought to be hidden away. After a slave uprising, the duo escapes and come upon a piece of wood with gold in it. Realizing it's part of the hidden gold, they search for more, encountering the tough and imposing General Makabe Rakuroda of the defeated Akazuki. Using the pair's greed, the general recruits them to smuggle the rest of the gold out of Yamana territory, along with the young princess of the Akazuki clan, who poses as a mute servant in order to keep her identity a secret. Led by the general, the 4 must navigate through enemy land to avoid detection and get both the gold and the princess to safety. All the while, Tahe and Madashichi plot on how to steal away the gold for themselves. This film provides one of the more notable early examples of an action-adventure film as we know it today, with a group of people united in a quest to go from point A to point B, having to deal with a variety of fights, trials, and difficulties along the way. Also contained within is a well-crafted story, the usual great cinematography and directing from Kurosawa, and solid acting. Hidden Fortress also does something atypical in film, which is that it gives us an unlikable protagonist. Even though General Rakuroda is the obvious hero of the film, we primarily follow Tahe and Madashichi, with the story being from their perspective, making this film as much about their journey as it is the survival of the princess. So we're getting a story from the point of view of 2 lowly, greedy, selfish, ignorant, and cowardly peasants. Not exactly your typical protagonists. This different storytelling style appealed to a young filmmaker as he wrote what would go on to become perhaps the most popular film series of all time, Star Wars. George Lucas has openly admitted that Hidden Fortress influenced him upon writing Star Wars, primarily setting the film from the point of view of atypical lowly characters. In this case, R2-D2 and C-3PO, though in the end, the droids don't really feel like the focus of Star Wars as much as Tahe and Madashichi are in Hidden Fortress. Regardless, the similarities are still very apparent, as in both films, one is significantly shorter and one taller. There's frequent bickering, and in the beginning of the films, they split up in a desert after an argument, only to be later reunited when they are both captured by the same people, or Jawas in the case of Star Wars. In his earlier drafts, Lucas even wrote for Leia to be accompanied by an older Jedi, much like the princess in Hidden Fortress was accompanied by a grizzled veteran. One could assume the older Jedi was Obi-Wan, who was ultimately reworked to be a supporting role. And interestingly, the actor who played General Rakuroda, Toshiro Mifune, was considered for the role of Obi-Wan. This is ultimately a fun adventure film full of humor, a couple of twists, and great characters, while also being much more digestible than Seven Samurai given it's only about 2 hours and 20 minutes. While it might seem a bit slow and dated in some aspects to the modern audience, this is still an undeniable classic. Now, even though I don't think it's as much of a must-watch as some of his other films, it's still a great film that shouldn't be missed. Now, let's fast forward to 1961. By this point, Kurosawa had become more well-known thanks to the growing popularity of his earlier films and the 1960 remake of Seven Samurai, The Magnificent Seven, which was actually not very popular in the US upon its release. Its initial popularity came mostly from Europe. Still, people outside of Japan were becoming increasingly familiar with his name when he released the next film in this set, Yojimbo. The story follows a mysterious wandering ronin as he happens upon a corrupt town in the midst of a power struggle between two rival gangs. When he sees the state of the town, he decides to stick around to help. Using his wits and skills with the sword, he plays both sides off one another with the intent to force them to eradicate themselves and free the town from their influence and destruction once and for all. Inspired in part by Dashiell Hammett's novels The Glass Key and Red Harvest, this is a wonderful film from Kurosawa, who uses his usual expert writing and directing to give us a fun and fairly clever samurai film. Star Toshiro Mifune once again delivers a great performance, proving why he was Kurosawa's go-to leading man. And in this film, he's actually portraying one of the earliest examples in film of the man with no name character type. You know, that mysterious stranger that wanders into town and saves the day. In the film, he actually gives his name as Kawabatake Sanjuro. Now, Kawabatake translates to mulberry field, and he uses that name while looking at a mulberry field, making it clear he made it up on the spot. And as for his given name Sanjuro, well, that translates to 30-year-old. And while it could technically be his true given name, it's implied it's not his real name, and thus he remains an anonymous character. Though, for simplicity's sake, we can just refer to him as Sanjuro. And that is a good segue into the slight controversy following the popularity of this film, a little movie called A Fistful of Dollars. A Fistful of Dollars is a huge film in its own right. While not technically the first Italian Western, it was the first to receive such huge international success, resulting in the coining of the term spaghetti western. It also established one of Clint Eastwood's most iconic roles, commonly referred to as the man with no name, though in the credits he's referred to as Joe. This film is a remake of Yojimbo, containing a similar story, characters, plot beats, and scenes. However, Sergio Leone didn't bother to acquire the rights to remake Yojimbo, resulting in a lawsuit filed against him for infringement, which delayed the release of A Fistful of Dollars. Leone tried to claim that he was not remaking Yojimbo, but rather was inspired by the same Dashiell Hammett novels. That didn't fly, and Kurosawa ended up receiving a percentage of the profits from this unofficial remake, supposedly making more money from Leone's film than he ever made from Yojimbo. Ultimately, this is a great film, and probably the most accessible from the set to the modern American audience. It has wry humor, clever tactics, a couple splashes of action, and a likable anti-hero played to perfection by Toshiro Mifune. Much like the prior films in this review, Yojimbo is yet another undeniably influential film, ultimately resulting, unofficially or not, in the popularity of spaghetti westerns. And even though I think Seven Samurai is the best film in this set, Yojimbo is my favorite to watch thanks to its more digestible runtime, faster pace, and the great protagonist. After the release of Yojimbo, Kurosawa went about working on his next film. His initial plan was to make a faithful adaptation of Shigeru Yamamoto's novel, Peaceful Days, which he was simply going to write and leave the directing up to someone else. He began working on that script prior to Yojimbo's release, and once that film became as popular as it did, the studio requested Kurosawa make a sequel to it, a rare occurrence for him, making this the second and final time he would write and direct a sequel. Kurosawa reworked his original adaptation of Peaceful Days, changing it so that it could serve as a continuation of Yojimbo, and thus was born 1962's Sanjuro. The film opens up with 9 younger samurai as they meet at a shrine, awaiting the arrival of the clan's superintendent, to whom they confided in that they thought the Lord Chamberlain and uncle of one of the 9 was corrupt after hearing something he said. Sanjuro happens to be napping in the shrine and overhears all of this, advising them that they misunderstood the uncle's words and it was likely the superintendent was the corrupt one, and he was probably coming to kill them. When he turns out to be correct, he hides the samurai to keep them safe. He then begrudgingly decides to accompany them, knowing they aren't smart enough to stay alive with the superintendent after them. When Sanjuro discovers the uncle has been kidnapped by the superintendent and his co-conspirators, He must once again use both his wits and his skills with the sword to outsmart the corrupt officials and free the uncle, while keeping the 9 inept samurai alive. This is the only film in the collection I'd never heard of prior to buying it a couple decades ago, and the only film in the collection that isn't inherently influential. Even though it was fairly popular at the time, I feel like it's kind of become more of a hidden gem in this day and age. But that doesn't mean it should be overlooked. Mifune once again steals the show as the gruff and witty Sanjuro. However, the new wrinkles this time are the bumbling and naive 9 samurai who consistently get in his way or mess up his clever plans. They serve as an enjoyable foil for the protagonist, helping add to the increase in humor. Speaking of the humor, this certainly isn't a comedy, but I found it to be funnier than the prior film, particularly from the interactions between Mifune and the samurai, and the inclusion of a kidnapped enemy guard who ends up living in a closet. And even though this has more humor, I felt like it also has a much more somber message about the usage of violence to solve problems. Now, even though I still prefer Yojimbo, this is a highly enjoyable and fun film that knows when to add humor and when to get serious. It's the least well-known of the 4 films, but much like Yojimbo, I think it's one that holds up better to the modern American audience. So, if you enjoy Yojimbo, you should definitely check out this slightly inferior sequel, which still benefits from Kurosawa's wonderful way with words and skills behind the camera. Now that I've talked about the movies, let's take a look at the Criterion Collection offerings, starting with this DVD box set. Getting these 4 films in a single set is quite the deal, with 3 of them being undeniably influential and iconic films. Criterion is known for going to great lengths to give us high-quality releases. However, these DVDs do leave a lot to be desired. Sure, they went through a film restoration and mostly look as good as any other DVD. However, there are plenty of noticeable moments of film marks or damage, especially in the oldest film, Seven Samurai. Given their age, I think they did a serviceable job with the technology at the time. Aside from the restoration and an updated subtitle translation, there is very little to make this release special. The only true special feature is a very short interview with George Lucas, which is included on the Hidden Fortress disc. It's a cool interview, but given that it's the only interview in the entire set, it's disappointing with how short it is. Other features included are trailers and a commentary on Seven Samurai by Japanese film expert Michael Jeck, though it is a far more technical commentary for my tastes, as he frequently talks about the staging of any given shot, making it an interesting listen for film students and aspiring directors, but few others. And that's it. There's not a single making of, nor are there interviews with anyone involved in the production of the films, making this a fairly bland release. However, in the time since this set has been released in 2002, Criterion has released each film on Blu-ray, though not as a set, with the only exception being the 2-pack with Yojimbo and Sanjuro. Each film comes with a 45 to 50 minute making of that was created in 2003 as part of the Toho Masterworks series, Akira Kurosawa, It Is Wonderful to Create. These specials contain interviews with various cast and crew members, including Kurosawa himself, about the production of the given film and are wonderful little specials. However, the Seven Samurai Blu-ray is where the goods are, containing not only the Toho Masterworks making of, but also My Life in Cinema, Akira Kurosawa, a 2-hour interview with Kurosawa from 1993 as he recounts a bit of his youth, his journey getting into film, what it was like working in the film industry at that time, and his thoughts about various films he made over his career. Plus, we get Seven Samurai Origins and Influences, a 55-minute documentary made exclusively for Criterion Collection that contains interviews with various film experts and historians as they discuss the impact of Seven Samurai and what led up to Kurosawa creating his masterpiece. And lastly, included within this 2-disc set is a 55-page booklet full of various essays from film experts and historians, in addition to a translated transcript adapted from an interview with actor Toshiro Mifune. These are some fantastic extras for any fan of Kurosawa, film student, or movie buff, making the approximately $30 price tag well worth it. These new Criterion Collection Blu-ray releases come with a variety of new making-of specials and interviews, basically the type of special features you usually expect from Criterion Collection. And so, if you're looking to get these films, I highly recommend buying them on Blu-ray. Sure, it'd be nice to get them all as a set, but given that the price of this DVD set is currently going for over $200, and buying them separately on Blu-ray would likely be at least half the price of the DVD set, it's a no-brainer to go for the higher quality option. Akira Kurosawa was a masterful filmmaker, undeniably one of the best that ever was, continuing to influence generation after generation of filmmakers. His works inspired Star Wars, spawned countless remakes, popularized genres, and aided in the improvement of the Japanese film industry. These 4 films are a good sampling of his most influential and well-known samurai films, but by no means are they his only notable films. So should you enjoy them, be sure to seek out films like Rashomon, High and Low, or Ron, just to name a few. Well, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and be sure to leave a comment, high five, random phrase, compliment, or spice sake in the comments below. And as always, be sure to visit HappyDragonPictures.com and follow us on Facebook to stay up to date with all of our releases, in addition to checking out our Patreon campaign to allow us to continue creating videos like this one. For the DVD Shelf Foreign Flix, this is Sanjuan Menlong, reminding you not to bonk a drunken idiot on the head as he walks through a doorway.